What's going on, everybody? I want to talk to you today about cover in Star Wars Legion. There are different types of cover. We're going to talk about how cover works, what different types there are, and how you apply it to different units. So the first thing I want to talk about is the first piece of cover you've ever seen, and that's your barricades. Now, these barricades are included with the core set, and they're going to provide heavy cover to any troops that are behind them. Now, what does that mean? Well, the first thing we need to do is break down the different types of cover. First off, there is no cover. That's basically represented as troops that are out in the open, and that means they get no special benefit. But there are other types of cover. There's light cover. Light cover is represented in game as something that gives you partial protection from incoming fire, but not that much. And what light cover does is that's going to remove one of the damage that is rolled against you before you roll your defense dice. During the apply, dodge, and cover step. Now, you also have heavy cover, and the difference is heavy cover is going to remove 2 of those damage as opposed to just 1. So what are some ways you can get light and heavy cover? Well, any unit that has a suppression token applied to it is going to have its cover level increased by 1. So a unit with no cover is going to have light cover if they have a suppression token. And a unit that has light cover already, perhaps it's behind a tree, can now get heavy cover if it has a suppression token because the light cover is going to be increased by 1. Another thing that will provide light cover is vehicles will provide light cover for any shot that is going through them to units behind them. And that also works both for friendly and enemy units. So this AT-RT, for example, would give the stormtroopers light cover from the rebel troopers, as well as the rebel troopers light cover from the stormtroopers. Vehicles can potentially get cover, but now we need to talk about what is going to potentially give cover. And this is something that you actually have to do at the start of the game. So the general rule is that a piece of terrain has to cover up more than half of the miniature at least in order to provide cover for it. And that's why barricades will provide heavy cover for troops. However, a barricade does not cover half of an AT-ST, so it will not give an AT-ST heavy cover. So one of the things you're going to do whenever there's something that's in question is you're going to compare them to the unit. So maybe we'll take our AT-RT for example. Now this piece can provide heavy cover because it definitely covers up more than half of that unit. And that same thing goes for the other units as well. However, for pieces of terrain that are custom built like this, you might say that only the wing portion provides heavy cover, and this little snowdrift here, while it's small, doesn't cover up half, so it might not even provide any cover at all for the trooper itself. And you're going to talk about these things before the game starts. Whereas other pieces like trees, for example, a tree line is going to provide light cover because of it being wood and not necessarily metal. But the trees are so tall that it could actually provide light cover even to vehicles because of the size of the trees and how they're larger than half of even the largest vehicle. Same thing goes for larger pieces of rocks or mountains and how that is certainly larger than half of the AT-ST, and so that could provide heavy cover for an AT-ST. And that's one of the things where you're going to look at the size of the miniature and determine, is this able to be blocked for this? So barricades, as a rule, definitely for all troopers, but when you get bigger than troopers is where you're going to have to determine these things before the round starts. Now, once you do have that determined, you also, for units that have multiple units, if that cover is going to apply to them at all, at least half of the unit needs to be behind them. So if this stormtrooper here is firing at these guys, well, you've got 4 people in there, so they're covered. However, if he's at an angle and they're like this, like if he's firing there, they're no problem. But if he's around here, well, maybe only this leader is behind heavy cover, but the other 3 are out of heavy cover, so therefore, at least from this angle, they're not going to be protected by that heavy cover. So it's a situation where, yes, this does provide heavy cover because it's taller than half the unit, or half the miniature, but the majority of the unit is not behind it from this shot, whereas if their shot was coming from over here, then they would have it. So that's kind of how we apply cover. And the same thing goes for other pieces of terrain. Now for larger pieces, like a forest outcropping, if your pieces are inside that terrain, and since they are in base contact with it, and this goes for any piece of terrain, if your unit is in base contact with the piece of terrain, you're not treated as being obstructed by that actual piece. So here we would be able to shoot out of the woods without having the woods impact us, whereas somebody else shooting to us, we would be protected by the woods. A different case would be a barricade. For example, if we were in base contact with the barricade, we can shoot at these stormtroopers if we're the rebel troopers, because they are not protected by any other cover. And since my unit leader is in base contact with the barricade, I can shoot these guys without the barricade obstructing my own shot. However, if it was the other way around, now the stormtroopers are going to have heavy cover for my shot. And if the barricade is in the middle, then we're both going to have heavy cover for each other's shots. So that's not, that's benefiting each player equally or hurting each player equally in that case. So the ideal position is you want to be able to be in base contact with it, so this way you're shooting over it without being obstructed by it. And that goes for any piece of terrain. If you're in base contact with it, it's not going to obstruct your shots. At least with cover, you will still have to see them. So if you're in base contact with the forest place, but you're completely behind a tree and you can't even see them, then you're not going to have a line of sight to begin with. Speaking of line of sight, since that's one of the other things we need to measure in addition to range, line of sight comes into play when you're determining cover as well. So in the example we just spoke about, where I have two units on the other side of barricades, but neither one is in base contact, obviously this stormtrooper and this rebel trooper units will have heavy cover when they're firing to each other. However, if we have elevated terrain up here, we have a unit that can shoot over top of this barricade, and when you get behind them and you determine your line of sight, you realize that it's not obstructing your shot to any of these miniatures, so you'll not have to take this barricade into consideration. So elevation matters here, and so a higher up unit will be able to shoot at these rebel troopers without them being protected by this cover because of their angle. So it's like a true line of sight aspect. And the same thing goes for a larger vehicle as well. That larger vehicle could potentially shoot directly over another piece of terrain and not give that other unit heavy cover, depending on how tall it is. Now, if it's partially obstructed, then you are going to have to then measure and go from base to base and figure out which piece is actually blocking it. So now let's talk about how cover actually works. So these stormtroopers are going to attack these rebel troopers, and there's going to be heavy cover in the way. And one of the things that's going to happen is, let's say the stormtroopers rolled 4 hits against this unit. That would be enough to kill them, and if that were the case, then these rebel troopers would have to roll 4 white dice to defend against them. However, they'll roll their dice, they'll do any re-rolls and surge conversions, and then you go to the apply, dodge, and cover step. And this is the point where we're going to apply dodge tokens or the benefits of cover. So first you're going to say, well, we have heavy cover, so we're going to remove 2 of those hits. And now it's only going to be 2 that we would have to roll against. And if we had a dodge token, we could then spend that as well, and then only have to roll against 1 hit. So at most we would only suffer 1 result, which is nice. We'd still take a suppression because they did roll a hit during the attack. However, we're not going to lose our whole unit that way. So that much is really nice. But let's say instead that the attack rolled 3 crits in 1 hit. Well, criticals can't be removed by dodge or cover. So in this case, we would only be able to remove the 1 hit from the heavy cover, even though it can remove 2. Since there are no regular hits to remove, we only rolled crits. So crits are way better for getting through those hard to reach places. Don't think of them as a critical hit that's going in and completely messing up this unit, but rather think of it as a very accurate shot. Criticals in this game are almost basically accuracy, as opposed to criticals in other games which tend to have extra disastrous and game-breaking effects. In this case, they're just basically like they're more accurate. So let's look at some other things, like we have surges. So stormtroopers can convert surges to hits. Well, those are going to get converted before the apply, dodge, and cover steps. So if they rolled 4 surges, they would all then become hits, and then the rebels would go ahead and remove them 2 after that. So the timing of this is important because there are other keywords like impact. So let's say, for example, I had a snow speeder. Now a snow speeder has cover of 1, so we don't even need to worry about the barricade right now. If we're shooting the snow speeder and we were attacking, and let's say we had impact 1 because we had a DLT, and a DLT stormtrooper is going to add some red dice. So let's go ahead and find one and put him over here. There we go. There's our DLT. All right. Now our DLT gives us impact 1, and what impact does is it allows me to change one hit to a critical. But this actually happens after the apply, dodge, and cover, and after the defense, after armor takes effect. I'm sorry, before armor takes effect, but after the apply, dodge, and cover step. So what will happen is, let's say we rolled all hits, and impact would allow us to change one of those to a crit. The snow speeders would have canceled one already. But here's where it really comes into play. Let's say our whites, and we get more standard results here, and let's say our whites ended up being misses. And let's say we even got a miss with a red die, and all we rolled was one hit. You might say, oh, well, that's good news. I'll be able to turn that hit into a crit with impact. The problem is cover, applied dodge and cover happens before those modifications, such as card-based modifications like impact, happen. So the cover 1 is going to cancel this hit before I have the opportunity to turn one hit into a crit. So that's why cover can be useful even for vehicles that have armor, because especially in those long-range shots where that DLT is only going to roll 2 dice and you're going to have a small attack pool, you have a fairly decent chance of being able to mitigate that. Even if they only roll 1 blank, you're going to be able to cancel the other hit before it gets turned into a crit. And so that is an important aspect of the timing. It's an even more important thing when you get to the larger units like the rocket launcher troops that roll 3 black dice and add impact 3. Because now they're, if they're attacking you and they can attack at range 4, if they get 3 hits, that's going to be 3 crits if you don't stop it. So that's why, and potentially a vehicle may also want to dodge. With the introduction of General Veers, you're noticing now that vehicles can gain dodge tokens through one of his command cards, and that might not be the first option that people would normally choose for a vehicle as an action, as dodge. But when you're faced with somebody who has a powerful impact weapon, dodge can be very useful because it can eliminate those hits. So if you apply cover 1 from a snowspeeder, and if you had a dodge, you would take that potential impact 3 shot down to only an impact 1 shot, or at least a single crit, and now you only have to roll against 1 point of damage. And look at that, we got lucky and rolled an armor symbol. So that is basically the order and timing of the way that all of these work. One of the things that's really just great is that taller units do get that benefit of you were able to go from the center point, middle, and look right over, and so you don't have to worry about the little bits of terrain that are in between. And always remember that if you're in base contact with a piece of terrain, that terrain is not going to obstruct your own shot or provide cover to your opponents, because you are in base contact with it. Now, for larger pieces of terrain and for more awkward pieces of terrain, you're going to have to decide with your opponent how they're going to impact the game beforehand. And if you ever come to a point where you guys just completely disagree, you're just going to roll a die and let that be your determining factor. The red die has 3 armor symbols on it and 3 sides that are not armor symbols, 2 blanks and 1 surge. And so you just say, all right, do you want the armor or the blank? And then you just decide it that way. That's the best way to decide those things. And because it's a 50-50 shot either way, or you can flip a coin or do whatever method you prefer. But the rules do recommend using the armor symbol and or using the red die. But and again, that's not going to happen too often, because I think this is a casual, friendly game that's going to really support a fun-based gameplay rather than trying to be a complete, adherence to rules with no budging at all. I think it's very immersive. I think it's very thematic, and it can be a lot of fun, especially the way that elevation and terrain allow your game to change on dynamic levels. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe, and let me know what you think down in the comments below, guys. I really appreciate all the support. Thank you so much for watching. Check out my other Legion videos too, and don't forget Crabbok.com has all the Legion videos and information that you can possibly desire. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.